And they suggest that emotion areas are very active when people consider that case. But these white bars are what happens in the brain when people consider the lever pulling case. They're not quite as high, but you see emotions are still actively involved. Emotions seem to be involved regardless of the kind of decision that's made. Maybe I'm going to skip over this very briefly. There's some interesting stuff about the role of positive emotions in moral judgment. Oh, let me just give you this one. So this is an anagram. Try and switch the letters around and turn it into a word. How many of you can do that? Okay. Here's another one. How many of you can do that? We're getting a few hands slowly. Okay. What is it? Grime. So that's it. This one is harder, right? So in a study that looks at the effect of positive emotions on pro-social behavior, people were either given hard anagrams or easy anagrams, very hard or easy. After being given the easy anagrams, people were much more helpful. They were asked to go door to door to get donations for a cause. They were twice as likely to go door to door after solving easy anagrams than hard anagrams. And you can show in the case of these trolley studies, after watching the boring film about Spain, pretty much everyone says, don't push the fat guy in front of the trolley. But oops, did I miss the rest of the slide? I did. After watching a piece of Saturday Night Live comedy, people are 3 times as likely to say, push the fat guy in front of the trolley. Unfortunately, the authors use Chris Farley in this study, and after watching Chris Farley, you want to kill all fat people. It's really a robust result that's recently been replicated in a couple of other studies. The thought with this work is that positive emotions are among the other emotions that contribute to moral decision making, and we can see these cases of trolley dilemmas as pitting a helping norm, which is supported by positive emotions, against a harming norm, which is driven by these negative emotions. So in these cases, it's not emotion versus reason, it's positive emotion versus negative emotion. I want to end with a final objection that I think is very important, because what I've been doing here is what people call description, descriptive science. I'm telling you how the emotional systems in our minds actually work. But there's a difference between a descriptive claim and a normative claim. A normative claim is a claim about what we should do, not what we actually do. Now, we actually use emotions to make moral judgments, but maybe we should stop doing this. Maybe we should use reason to make moral judgments. Maybe we should eliminate emotions from morality. And this was a view that Immanuel Kant advocated. He said that emotions often arise in the context of moral judgment, but we shouldn't listen to our mere emotions. We should let morality be based on reason. So this is an objection that would make Kant happy. That convinces me that Kant favors Kat Churchland has a wonderful paper from quite a few years ago where she argued that Kant actually was the neuropathic equivalent of the Vulcan. So has some basis in reality. Here's my brief reply to Kant. Now I will refute Kantian ethics. I think that Kant's view that we should extirpate emotions from morality would have very negative consequences. For one thing, it would make us emotionally lazy, which is to say emotions are essential for motivation. You can believe something is forbidden or bad and be totally indifferent to it, not do anything about it. Emotion is what drives us to act. When you see injustice, the mere description, somebody got more than they deserved, is not what sends you out on the street to fight for equality. It's the outrage that you feel when you experience injustice. So we need emotions for moral motivation. A more central point is that I think that the use of reason as our sole basis for morality would leave us morally stupid, which is to say morally ignorant. To know the difference between good and bad, it's not enough to use reason to describe how the world is. Because you could describe the world and still have no idea what's the right thing to do. Consider another domain like food taste. I could tell you the ingredients of one meal on the menu and then the ingredients of another meal on the menu. If you would know emotions, that if you didn't experience the gustatory pleasure that we call deliciousness, that list of ingredients would give you no information about which dish you should order. You might learn about its nutritional value, but if you didn't have a desire to live a long, healthy life, that information would be useless to you too. You always need some prior preference or end in order to use reason to figure out what to do. So emotions would leave us with no guidance. A loss of emotions would leave us with no guidance about how to act. But finally, there's a real concern that in the absence of emotion, we would be very susceptible to tendencies to engage in antisocial behavior. And I think what's so chilling about the studies of psychopathy is here we have a population who are seen to suffer from severe deficits in their emotional responsiveness. And what do? They often act antisocially. So in the absence of emotions as a corrective signal that lead us to feel connectedness to others and have strong commitments to the values that we are learning through our cultural groups, we end up treating each other very badly. So I think the Kantian recipe is a recipe for a kind of laziness, stupidity, and cruelty. And I will end with that and say that really the final lesson here is that in the domain of morality, we need to listen to our hearts. So, thanks.
We have 20 minutes or so for questions.
Enjoyed your talk, very real as well as your one in the trauma case, I think you make a good case against Josh Green if it's a matter of, if the claim is that reason, but not emotion plays a part. Once you establish that emotion does play some role, what is that example? I mean, to what extent does it really help your case? It would at least seem to fall well short of establishing that emotions are the primary cause, or that they're sufficient by themselves. It would seem to leave many different possibilities.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that body of data is very inadequate for coming up with anything like the complete theory of how morality works. So if you think about Josh Green as a neuroscientist, a cognitive neuroscientist, so he shows that emotions are active when people make these judgments. He's not in a position to say much about what role emotions are playing in those judgments. So this is one place where I really think the behavioral methods are essential to use in conjunction with the neuroscience to develop a causal model of how we arrive at these conclusions. So I think these methods where you induce emotions are extremely revealing in this case. One thing about Josh Green is I said before that he is convinced that these people in the switching case are not using any emotions. And I said that the data show otherwise. There's a further sense in which the data that are most important are maybe hidden by the standard. And here's why. I said that positive emotions play a especially strong role in helping. And there's a huge literature in support of that. You're trying to save 5 people on the track, and now you think, I need to help those people. And that may involve a sort of positive sense of your social connectedness to others. In every one of his studies, each of the conditions involves having to save some large number of people. So the helping need is present in each item, each one of his conditions. The data we get shown on the pictures are derived through subtraction methods, where we see a difference between conditions. If helping is a common denominator across these conditions, is literally erase all the positive brain structures, all the reward activation that you should expect to see given these kinds of scenarios. And he has a new study, which is not out yet, where he, instead of comparing conditions where helping is a common denominator, in conditions where you could help a few people or help a lot of people, and sure enough, you suddenly see lots of reward activation. Thanks.
I'm wondering if you would address the question of how much, or if you thought of, considered, how much of our emotional responses to specific situations are socially and culturally constructed, and I'm particularly thinking back to the fondling of the infants, and in some cultures, fondling of infants and young kids is acceptable.
Yeah, great. I think I am a strong believer in the kinds of approach that Pat Churchland advocated, looking at biocultural interaction. So I told you a lot about the psychology of morals, but then I said, well, the psychology is coming through a process of education, but where are the educators getting their values? And the whole culture is playing a role in determining what particular things will be considered right or wrong. And with Pat, I think she was wonderful in suggesting that the kind of relativism that this opens up to is nothing we should feel too concerned about, because after all, we do live in a world with a tremendous moral pluralism, and no major crisis has emerged. This seems to be a tolerable and stable position. I think societies that have different attitudes towards things that we cherish are sometimes making a mistake. So consider the use of scientific racism in trying to support the slave trade. Well, it's not just the values were wrong, the science was wrong. The claims made about human variation were simply mistaken. And the arguments that were being made depended on those claims. So I think there's room for moral criticism based on reason. But when you find a group whose science is the same as yours, and they arrive at different values, sometimes there's no fact of the matter who's right. One case of that is simply the divide between liberals and conservatives in our own culture. So we spend a huge amount of time engaged in public discourse that looks like argumentation. It looks like we give reasons for the liberal platforms against the conservative platform. But we never convince them. So what's going on? Is it just that the conservatives are dumb? Or is it that they're knowingly doing evil? Or are they just, they know we're right, but they continue to engage in nefarious behavior? No, it's probably that they have different fundamental moral values. And those differences lead to a certain kind of intractable debate. And when we encounter that intractability, the right solution is not to try and continue to use reason to persuade, that clearly isn't having any impact, but to design cultural institutions that allow people with moral differences to coexist and thrive within a single nation.
Thank you very much for a informative and engaging lecture. Back to the pedophile case, I'm wondering if we might be able to condemn the pedophile, irrespective of consequences, from the standpoint that a child can't give voluntary informed consent to any type of sexual activity. So even if he ever gets caught and the kid never finds out, it might still be fundamentally wrong. And I'm not a deontologist. I'm thinking about this kind of from an Aristotelian perspective, that emotions play an important role in moral decision making, but they get educated by reason, so that when you have that emotional response to disgust, that's because you thought critically about this, and it kind of is almost a causal loop.
Yeah, good question. I certainly don't want to go on record as arguing for the moral permissibility of pedophilia. I have some moments where I think, well, it's really an empirical issue. We can show these kids are not being harmed. We should open these clinics where pedophiles can go get their jollies and then they won't harm other people. But seriously, I think that pedophilia is probably something we could come up with some reasons against and maybe reasoning along those lines. But I want to draw out something about that particular proposal, which is that there's a lot of stuff we do to kids without their consent. We send them to school despite their protestations. So in those cases, we say it's permissible because the thing we're doing to them is permissible, is good. So the question of whether consent counts for or against something depends very much on whether we've already decided that the thing is good or bad. So I think that there may be a version of the consent argument that could be worked out here, but it's going to turn out to be a bit more complicated than it might appear. Great question.
Thank you.
Hi. So when you're talking about whether emotion or logic drives these moral decisions that we're making, you bring up, I guess, cognitive load, maybe when you were talking about